We are now in public session, and I'd like to welcome Ms Carolyn Lennon, Chief Executive Officer, and Mr Edward Story, Director of Strategy and Corporate Communications from AIR, to this meeting this afternoon to discuss the National Broadband Plan. Before we begin, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you're directed by the Chairman to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you're entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You're directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you're asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I also wish to advise you that any submission or opening statements that you've made to the committee will be published on the committee website after this meeting. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official by name or in either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And I just remind witnesses and members to turn off your mobile phones or to put them onto flight mode as they interfere with the sound system. So I'll ask Ms Lennon to give your opening statement.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to thank the committee for inviting AIR to attend today's meeting to discuss the National Broadband Plan. I'm joined by Edward Story, AIR's Director of Strategy and Corporate Communications. I don't propose to take members through a history of AIR, but just to outline that AIR is the principal provider of fixed line and mobile telecom services in Ireland. We have approximately 2 million customers and operate the most extensive network in the country. Open Air is the largest wholesale operator in the country, providing products and services to over 40 wholesale customers and more than 400,000 end users. We are also a major contributor to the economy, spending over £1 billion annually and employing just under 3,500 people directly. There is often much public commentary or speculation on AIR's investment, and I will turn to that shortly, but I believe it's important that facts are not overlooked and that the committee is made aware that over the last 5 years, AIR has invested more in our network than any other telecoms operator in Europe relative to its size, and this is illustrated with the accompanying graphic. In its investment of MVP, the committee has heard opinions from multiple witnesses about AIR's investment of £250 million in rural Ireland. This relates to the deployment of high-speed gigabit fibre technology past 300,000 rural premises with no state subsidy or taxpayer support. Today we have passed more rural premises with high-speed fibre broadband than the 300,000 originally planned, and we expect to pass approximately 340,000 premises when we close out this programme later in the summer. This was and is a significant private investment in rural Ireland, and as someone involved at the beginning of this investment, I'm very proud of the work done by the AIR team in every county in Ireland to bring fibre to the home to rural communities. Let me give you some facts. The investment in the 300,000 programme provided for premises from 885 exchanges. We rolled out over 27,000 kilometres of new fibre. We replaced 68,000 poles along the way and installed 110,000 four-port splitters, and that's the black box you see on many poles now in rural Ireland. Beyond that, we've had to upgrade 202 exchanges with fibre backhaul. There are a number of myths and misrepresentations on the record about this investment, and I want to address some of them here today. At the time AIR was deciding the next phase of our investment, we had completed a considerable investment in FTTC, or fibre to the cabinet, bringing fibre technology further out into the regions, into towns and villages. FTTH, or fibre to the home, was a natural follow-on from this, and to this end we publicly announced our intention to extend fibre to the home into the rural footprint back in 2015. It is often overlooked that the department at that time asked all operators to detail what their investment plans were for the period ahead. We informed the department about our rural fibre to the home plans, and ultimately AIR was the only operator to enter into a commitment agreement in respect of this investment, and we will have passed 340,000 premises with high-speed fibre before an MVP contract is signed. Removing these 300,000 premises from the intervention area had two impacts on the MVP subsidy. It removed the potential revenue from those customers, which drove the subsidy up, but it also removed the capital costs associated with passing and connecting those homes with fibre, which drove the subsidy down. This committee has heard much about the former from previous witnesses, but less attention has been paid to the latter, and the question of the net impact of both on the subsidy has not been addressed at all. Helpfully, the KPMG Single Bidder Solution Assessment Report answers that for us. On page 37, when they state that the budget model predicted in April 2017 a 787 million subsidy, and that was after the 300,000 was removed from the MBP. This is lower than the subsidy projections of up to 1 billion reported in the press as early as 2015. We believe that the removal of the 300,000 should have led to a reduction in the overall subsidy for the MBP, and this seems to have been confirmed by KPMG. Our fibre network in rural Ireland was built with a specific intention and an additional cost to Eir, so as to allow the eventual MBP winner to share the fibre in order to traverse the 300,000 region. It now appears that the decision taken by the bidder not to reuse this existing fibre infrastructure, but instead to duplicate and overbuild our fibre across the 300,000 has driven up costs and associated subsidy. We have included in our submission a sample map, Appendix 1, to demonstrate how the 300,000 fibre to the home network was rolled out, and we are happy to discuss the map in detail if members feel it's of benefit. In designing the 300,000, we firmly believed we were assisting the future MBP when we took the decision to terminate the 300,000 ribbon with a more expensive termination unit, which would have allowed any MBP bidder to connect into and fully utilise the assets we had deployed. It is important to note that while we were able to pass these 300,000 premises commercially, our knowledge and experience of the MBP process suggests that the extra costs and complexities of the MBP contract mean they would have required subsidy to pass if they had remained in the intervention area. On the issue of network access, there has been much public commentary and debate about the potential revenues that Eir might receive from the rental of its poles and ducts. Our prices are regulated, they are published and based upon a modest return on the significant cost of the 1,000+ engineers who work all year round in all weathers to maintain Eir's network and replace our poles. Eir's investment to support the rollout of the MBP could be as high as 200 million in the early years and 900 million over the life of the plan. It is important to note that this is not a quick return for Eir. In the first several years of the programme, Eir will be making significant capital investment to make ready the infrastructure for MBI. As such, we are taking on significant risk and operating at a loss for the term of the actual rollout phase. Nor does this represent incremental revenue to our existing revenue from our copper network, since this network will be decommissioned after fibre is deployed, and so the rental is replacement revenue to fund the cost of maintaining the poles and ducts. We'd like to remind the committee that Eir is not a monopoly provider of network infrastructure, and the state has already made it possible for publicly owned infrastructure to be used to deploy high-speed broadband. The preferred bidder has stated its intention to use ESB and other infrastructure where it makes sense for them, and I expect they will do so. Though, as I've just stated above, rural networks are very expensive to maintain, so the committee should not expect the ESB to be a free option. And finally, on this topic, I'd like also to point out to the committee the only cost talked about in detail here in respect to MBI's engagement with third parties is the reported 1 billion figure attributed to the cost of accessing Eir and ESB networks, which accounts for only 20% of the overall project cost. The other 80% of the cost we paid to privately owned and unregulated project subcontractors have not been subject to the same scrutiny or attention as that in the case of Eir. This is despite the fact that the access cost in respect of Eir's network is known, was always known, and is independently regulated by Comric. So the committee had three asks of the three themes the committee asked us to reflect on in your correspondence of today. And the first was in respect of the rollout time. We have always been of the view that deploying fibre technology across the entire intervention area is a project of such scale that it was always going to take a number of years to complete. 7 years, in our view, is a challenging but achievable target. As the only country building fixed fibre infrastructure in rural Ireland, we know how long it takes, and we know how events outside of your control can delay deployment. We believe our experience from the 300,000 deployment has been invaluable to us and to the department. It has allowed officials to prepare for and anticipate issues that are likely to be faced by MBI in their deployment. On the issue of value for money, I do not believe it's appropriate for Eir to make determinations on what is or is not good value for money for the taxpayer in respect of MBP. While there may not be a commercial case for fibre to every home, there may well be a case for society as a whole, and this is a question for government. However, it is clear to us that we can build rural fibre infrastructure at a lower cost than is currently envisioned in the plans, as outlined at the same levels of quality and service as the 300,000. There is no secret in that. Eir could complete the MBP based on Eir's approach to the 300,000 rural rollout for under 1 billion. At the time of Eir's departure from the bid process, my predecessor Richard Moate wrote to then Minister Naughton outlining our reasons for leaving the process, but also offering to discuss with the Department alternative ways of achieving the government's stated policy objectives. In terms of keeping costs down, Eir built its rural fibre rollout with the intention of providing access to its 300,000 fibre. We offered a product that would allow the preferred bidder to transverse the 300,000 area to reach the intervention area. The plan as it stands today is not to use this product and instead build fibre alongside parts of our 300,000 network. The logic for this is not clear to us, but also it's not a question for Eire. And finally, on the issue of ownership. Eire does not have a view on the issue of ownership per se, as this is a matter for the department. However, as a former bidder, I would say that the ownership of the network at the end of the 25-year period would have to be factored into the business case for any bidder. Also, as a private company, we at Eire believe strongly that the private sector can deliver high-quality, essential services to customers at a lower price that can be delivered to the public sector. As a regulated entity, we believe that this can be done in a way that opens the market to competition and delivers the lowest cost to society. While the private sector gap funding model has failed to deliver a competitive outcome for the MVP procurement, this need not have been the case had different choices been made along the way. We believe there are other models and other structures, such as the universal service obligation, that could have delivered high-speed broadband faster and cheaper than the existing process. However, we remain ready to support the MVP with our infrastructure if it's required, whether it's via private sector or public sector solution. So in conclusion, I'd like to say to members, it remains a source of real regret for Eire and for me personally that we ultimately found ourselves in a position where we could no longer remain in the MVP bid process. Having been personally very close to the process and those dedicated staff, current and former, who worked on it, I can assure you it was not a decision taken lightly or in haste. We entered the MVP process in good faith with one result: to win it. We continue to engage with the preferred bidder and with the department, and I want to make it clear that we completely support the policy of 100% connectivity for rural Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank Eire for coming before us this afternoon, and indeed for your comments there in relation to fully supporting the to NBI and the rollout of the national broadband process. And just to say that I think I want to acknowledge, first of all, the very significant private sector investment in telecoms over the last few years, and it's been very important for the country, and also your recognition. The recognition by Eire that fibre is the best technology and that a 7-year rollout is challenging but achievable. I just want to ask you a question. I listened to a podcast you did with technology journalist Adrian Weckler in relation to the National Broadband Plan, and in that interview you stated that €3 billion sounded about right in relation to the rollout of the National Broadband Plan. So just to compare that to, I suppose, over the last 24 hours in the media, we've heard statements about that this could be done for €1 billion, and I just want to get some clarity around that €1 billion figure and a breakdown of what it would mean. The department, when they were before our committee here in May, stated that it would cost approximately €1 billion to physically pass all premises, but there is a distinction between physically passing the premises and actually connecting the premises. So just my question to you would be, how much do you estimate it would cost to connect all the homes, and how much do you estimate it would cost to maintain the network over the 25-year period, and is VAT included in that figure? If you could just break down that €1 billion figure. So,
and I suppose the difference between the 3 billion on the Adrian Weckler podcast and the 1 billion number is that the 3 billion is the cost, in my opinion, our opinion, of a national broadband plan under the current gap funding model that's been proposed by the department. I was kind of surprised by some of the headlines today, because we would have put on the record, or our former CEO would have put on the record when we wrote, and that letter was released under Freedom of Information, that we could have delivered national broadband plan for a fraction of that cost, and that letter was put out in January 2018. So the difference in terms of the 1 billion price tag is that we would build that fibre network on the same basis that we've just almost completed the build of the 340,000. And what do I mean by that? So first of all, we'd use the fibre and the connection points in the 300,000, so we wouldn't be overbuilding the 300,000, because when we designed that 300,000, we were an active bidder in MVP. We were hoping to win it, so we added extra costs to the 300,000 build so that we could then roll out into the intervention footprint. We'd obviously use our own poles and ducts. We own them. We would use them. We'd use our own access network team and our contractors to build it and plan it. We'd use our own wholesale team to sell it. We'd apply the same connection model in the intervention area as we have in the 300,000, with the same connection cost. We just, as in the rest of the country, we'd apply the same SLA that currently exists in the rest of the country to the intervention area, and apply the same regulated pricing. And on that basis, based on our experience, and we're just about to finish rolling out to 340,000 homes in rural Ireland, the only people who have done it, the only people with that experience, we are certain that we could roll out fibre to the home to the rural homes in that intervention footprint for under £1 billion, because that's the model we use. But that's not the MBP model. The MBP model is a gap funding model that requires, separate wholesale division, a better SLA than exists in the rest of the country, differentiated pricing, a cheaper connection charge, and all of those things and that complexity, drives up the cost. And I was asked this question, I think, the last time I was here, in terms of, at the end, we made a decision to pull out because we couldn't make a commercial case on the back of all those costs. And then the big factor for us as AIR is whatever is going to happen in that 20% in terms of pricing, connection charges, etc. There's a massive risk for us that then becomes the pricing for the other 80% of our business, because we're regulated and we're not allowed to charge differentiated pricings in different parts of the country. And that was a massive risk for us. So again, that was a factor. So it's been treated today like new news. It hasn't been new news. If anyone goes back and has a look at Richard's letter, you'll see a fraction of the cost. So that's the difference.
So that 330,000 that you're currently rolling out, that's passing the home. That's not.
No, that's connecting. That's all in, and that would
to the home. So you're actually going up driveways, up laneways,
and that €1 billion includes a connection as well. So pass and connect
to every single. So you're proposing that you can do the three. You can roll out the national broadband plan as is envisaged. The connection now, the same quality and service that is in the NBI plan, where you go up every road, through every field for under €1 billion.
Well, the difference is
you're connecting to the home as opposed to just passing.
Yeah, we're absolutely connecting to the home. It's exactly the same model as in the 300,000 where we connect to the home. We were just looking at the numbers today. There's been 2% of people who've applied where we've said, here's our connection. So our connection rule is we'll do overhead connection. We won't dig an underground duct for you. If you want underground and not overhead, you've got to dig the duct yourself. If you have an underground duct already, we won't unblock it and it's blocked. If it's fine, we'll pull fibre to it, no problem. If it's blocked, we will ask you to unblock it. So applying those rules to the intervention footprint, that €1 billion includes that connection charge. And we were just, as I said, checking today to see how many people have said, no, I don't want to do my own ducting, or I don't want to block it. And 2% of the people where, we've gone out to do a connection and we've passed that information on. That's not what's envisioned with MBI, and they're also they are charging a cheaper connection charge in the intervention footprint than AIR's currently regulated connection charge in the 300,000. So we charge €170 connection charge, and my understanding of the MBI connection charge is €100. The SLA that in the MBI solution is in excess of 90% repaired within 2 days. The national SLA is in the 80s. Now, the reality of having an SLA in the 90% level means that you have engineers sitting around at home in North Donegal or West Kerry waiting for a repair to come in, because they just don't come in those volumes.
And then in relation to the cost of maintaining the network over 25 years, is that included in the €1 billion?
Yes, because, and again, we covered in our statement, currently today we make revenue on our copper network in rural Ireland in the intervention footprint. And that revenue is the revenue that we use to maintain our ducts and poles. When MBI rolls out their fibre network in the intervention footprint, our copper customers and the revenue associated with them will migrate all of our copper network onto MBI's network, and they will get the revenue. But we will still have to maintain the ducts and the poles that MBI are going to build their network on, which is where that €1 billion over 25 years for maintenance of the ducts and poles comes from. If we were to build the network, they would still be on our fibre network. So the revenue that we lost on copper, we'd have on fibre. And then we would use that revenue to maintain the ducts and poles as we do today.
So are you saying you're going to keep your copper? Are you not going to have fibre to the homes, to all homes?
Yeah, we're going to take them, but over time we would take copper down. Once we had a full fibre network, if we were building it, we'd take copper down.
So you're saying that you can provide broadband to every home, farm and business in Ireland. This is fibre to every home across Ireland for under €1 billion.
For the rural homes in the intervention footprint, yes, and connected for under 100 years. If we remember the last time when we talked about the intervention footprint, we talked about the 540,000 homes, but only 460,000 of them are actually rural homes. And because our 300,000 has gone to 340,000, that actually reduces the rural homes to 420. So for that 420,000 rural homes, we can pass and connect them for under €1 billion. We're absolutely certain. We're just finishing the 300,000, but that was always the case. Honestly, it isn't new news.
And the VAT, is that $1 billion inclusive of
Yes.
the VAT?
Yes.
So you're going to maintain the network, the cost to maintain the network over 25 years. You will be able to connect all homes right across the country, 100% of homes, and VAT, all included for under €1 billion. And the quality of the service will be equal to the NBI.
No, the quality of the service will be equal to what we provide in the 300,000.
That's the key. That's the key.
No,
that
and the differences I've pointed out are the higher SLA that NBI is signed up to in rural, the lower connection charge, the different pricing. So if we just kept our 300,000 machine going and kept rolling with all the same things that we apply, the same connection costs, the same SLA or whatever, we can do it for under €1 billion. But that's not the procurement model that we have today. It requires much higher SLAs, lower connection costs, lower pricing, and when you factor all those in, and then a new wholesale team and all of that, that drives the cost and that drives the complexity, and that's why you get nearer to those higher €3 billion numbers.
Okay, I'm going to move it over to my colleagues, Deputy Timmy Dooley.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thank you for your presentation. So just to be clear, you take the last home in a ribbon development on the edge of a village. We'll take, for example, the village of Mount Shannon, where I was born and raised. So the last home out one of those roads gets a service at the moment of a speed X. You probably know. So
A couple of megs, yeah.
a couple of megs. Okay. So the speed on they're part of your 300,000.
Oh no, if they're on their 300,000, they'll get up to a gig. But sorry.
Okay, so they have up to a gig.
Yeah.
And the end of that road, between the last house that has been served and the end of that road, say there's another 5 houses. What you have said to us, for €1 billion, you can give all those homes in the intervention area the same service. So we just go down now to the micro. So the person who's already getting the gig, the last person in the line where that box now exists, you take the fibre now to the next 8 homes, to the end of that road.
Yeah.
What is the difference in the service that those 8 people would get versus the 20 that have come from the village out to that point?
So
under what you're saying you could do now for €1 billion.
So the product is exactly the same. Right. It's exactly the same technology, exactly the same four-port splitter, exactly the same fibre.
Same speed.
Same speed, everything's the same. But the difference between us offering it in the 300,000 model is they would be charged €170 to connect.
Yeah.
The MBI model is €100. Okay. We would charge the same regulated fibre price that we charge for the rest of our customers or whatever. I believe that the MBI proposal is to cap it at €30. If it needed repair, and fibre is actually really good, it's great with lightning, it's great with water, so the repair levels are much lower, but if it needed a repair and you were on our 300,000 model, we would say that 85% of repairs would be done within 2 days. If you're in MBI land, you'd be saying 90%, so you get potentially a quicker repair.
So that's the only difference.
Yeah, and in our case, we would use our existing and current wholesale team to sell it,
okay.
And our existing and current access team to build and plan it. In the MBI model, we needed to set up a separate wholesale team, which, another 80 people, all the costs with that and the complexity.
So that brings us back then to where this all started, when the state got advices from KPMG and PwC, and they advised on the gap funding model on the basis, and they felt it was the best way forward because it would provide a competitive environment. And looking at the marketplace as they did, they identified yourselves, the ESB and others, and they talked about the amount of infrastructure that was already there and the capacity of the state to expect a competitive environment because the bidders would leverage their existing infrastructure. That was the guiding principles upon which this was established. And what you have said to us, in your efforts to leverage that existing infrastructure, the NBI, as it was constituted, or the procurement process, this consultative dialogue, effectively prevented you from making savings based on your existing infrastructure.
Indeed. I think the intention was to have that competitive tension, but the reality was, I think the decisions ended up being about making it a level playing field. So advantages that we had, i.e. we own the infrastructure,
Right.
we were building in the 300,000, we had a wholesale team, were kind of negated as part of that process, which drove extra cost and kind of complexity for us.
So in effect, what the state did in designing this, the state together with its consultants, in designing this level playing pitch so that there can be true competition, it will ultimately cost the taxpayer. We will have had pure competition, all right, but just purely for being able to say we had pure competition.
Well, it drives extra cost.
But it will cost the taxpayer $2 billion.
Yeah, it'll drive extra cost, absolutely.
So when Richard Mote, in his letter, when he wrote to the Minister at the time, said it has become overly complex and onerous,
Yeah.
that's what really he was referring to,
Yeah.
that the procurement process was no longer fit for the purpose of providing broadband to the 542,000 homes at the best price. It was about providing broadband to 542,000 homes, and we know that there was a level playing pitch for all those who pitched in the knowledge that raising that bar for everyone meant that you couldn't use, or the ESB couldn't pitch in their existing infrastructure, and therefore the taxpayer were effectively on the hook for an additional $2 billion.
You had to build all that into your costing.
Yeah. Now, can I also ask you, so that's, I'm clear now on the money piece.
Yeah, sure.
I'm clear that was as a result of the decision taken to try to have an effective competition. The merits of that are so that's the cost piece. So having a procurement process that requires everyone now to create a completely new set of infrastructure, what does that do to the rollout period, the time from get-go to completion?
So I suppose on the
take the example at the minute. We've got those. We talk about that string of development that's already has got your broadband to 300,000. To overlay that again or find its way back into somebody else's backhaul, what kind of timing is it?
I suspect it's probably going to take you the best part of 12 months to build.
How much?
The best part of 12 months to build through the 300,000, where you could start today. Now, again, we referenced it, and there is a.
So I'm going to hold you there, because you see, what's being pushed against us, if you in any way interfere with the current process, and by the way, the government have been saying this to us for 2 years. When I raised concerns, when you pulled out and when Cyril pulled out, and I went to the then Minister, he said, oh, we got to keep going, because if you do anything now to stall this process, we're going to lose 2 years. So in essence, it's the way the procurement process was put together that loses that time, because it requires whoever wins it, even yourself, that you'd have to go back and almost build.
So it doesn't require it, but so we have a product, a passive product, we'd call it, in that 300,000, where a successful bidder could use our spare fibres that we built in when we were building the 300,000, could use our connections, but the remaining bidder has decided not to do that and to build through the 300,000. I'm sure that decision could be revisited, and they could decide to use that passive product, and that would save some time, because you wouldn't have to build through the 300,000. But to be honest, I never felt ever that a 3-year build time for MBP was realistic. I honestly never felt it was realistic. And just to give you an example, we're just finishing now the 340,000. It took us 3 years. And you say, oh, okay, well, it's not that, it's not triple that. But the reality is you've got to do 3 times the amount of fibre to do the intervention area that we had to do. So if you just multiply that, that could get you to 9 years. I think it won't take that long. It'll get some more synergies. But honestly, I think 5 to 7 years is realistic. We'll probably the majority of it done in 5 years, but the tails and the really hard to reach will probably get you up to 7.
So just take it in based on your knowledge of what Granahan and McCourt are offering, and they don't exist in the marketplace at the minute in terms of into this area. To get the service providers onto their network, how long would that take?
Well, they have to set up a wholesale. They have to set up a wholesale business. Yeah. I mean, it takes us, it's about a quarter to onboard kind of a new operator as someone comes in and we go through all that process. But we have we have 80 people in a wholesale team. We have all our systems. We have, we call a unified gateway that everybody connects through. We have all those processes, so that is going to take a while to set up. But I suppose they'll set that up in parallel while they're starting to do their build.
Okay. So we're clear then that there's a time lag associated with overbuilding your network, and that's going to have.
That could be revisited, that option. Yeah.
Okay. I think that covers most things for me. Thank you very much. No, sorry, just one point. I know what it was. I just read an article before I came down in one of the main newspapers where it indicates that people are now looking at you again in the context of you being able to do it for $1 billion. But it said the biggest hurdle to this is that AIR says that it doesn't want to re-enter any form of the National Broadband Plan. Is that true?
We certainly don't want to re-enter in its current form because none of the things that we pulled out for have changed in terms of separate wholesale, SLAs, etc. But we're a commercial company. We know how to do this. So if there was another form where it was commercially sensible or viable for us to do it, of course we'd be involved.
So if the government decided not to proceed, now they've gone a long way, and it's arguable that they should have known that you had the capacity to do it more cheaply, based on the letter from Mr. Moat. Was there ever a conversation between the Minister and Richard Moat after that, or was there a capacity to exchange that dialogue?
I think the last communication, I think Richard requested a meeting with the former Minister, and they met, and Richard told him of our decision to pull out. Now, they had met the previous summer because we were coming up to having to submit our ISDS, and Richard wanted to put on the record yet again. I mean, we had been putting on the record with the team, but he wanted to put on the record with the Minister that we had some real concerns. But after that meeting, I think Richard then wrote to him. But in that letter, he was very clear about why we pulled out, and he also put in the letter that we could build this for a fraction of the cost being talked about, and that's, as I said.
So if the government decided not to proceed with the signing of a contract with Grenahan McCourt, and a new process was underway, you would be...
Of course we'd look at it, yeah.
You'd look at it, and you could do it for under $1 billion.
Yeah. Depending on the model that we go for,
But if the model mirrored 300,000, if it was a fit for the 300,000.
Those costs all stand, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Deputy Ryan, then Albert, Senator.
Indeed. Can I ask you, in the current intervention area, sorry, not the intervention area, the 340,000 houses area, can you tell me roughly what's the take-up been in terms of houses that have actually connected?
So that's kind of commercially sensitive, so we don't release it. But just to give people an indication, so first of all, it's on track for our business plan, so we're very happy with it. And what we do, and the last number I think we released, which is about 6 or 9 months ago, was 14%. But we measure it by quarter. So the houses we pass in the first quarter, and they would be more than double the overall take-up. So what you see is you go into an area, there's pent-up demand, it comes on board, and then over time that continues to grow. So the averages bring it down because every quarter we're adding new courses into it, but we're very happy with the uptake, and we'd be confident that it will continue to grow. Again, what we also find, because remember we're a wholesale network, so we have all the operators on our network, and we saw this when we rolled out our fibre to the cabinet network. So AIR were the first ones on, and you get some customers coming on, and then Vodafone came onto the network, and that increased it again, and then Sky came onto the network, and that increased it again, because you've got a lot of people advertising, and the awareness levels of it increases, and the kind of rising tide raises all boats. So Vodafone are selling fibre to the home now on that network. We'd expect Sky too, so we'd expect that to keep increasing. But we're very happy with it. We've no issues from a business case point of view.
On that pricing, and the pricing in that area, so you've both a retail price and a wholesale access price. Yeah. Are they regulated prices?
The wholesale prices are all regulated. We've just had a market review of our pricing there, and in retail what we have is what's called a margin squeeze test. So there needs to be a gap between the wholesale price and the retail price, and that's again checked by the regulator.
Do you want me to ask you roughly what it is per month?
Well, on wholesale, at entry level, it's about €19, for the 150 product, and then it goes up by I think about another €7 for the 300, and then up by I think another €14 for the gig. But the vast majority of people are buying in at the 150. And some people the 300. There's not many people buying the gig product at the moment because most of us, our laptops, our homes are not ready for a gig, but we will be ready at some stage of the future.
Okay. And just to tease out what you say, the difference between the national broadband area and this model. Sorry, is that 340,000 area any different to the other houses in the more urban areas? Or it's the same?
No, it is different. So and actually I don't know whether our map helps us if people have a copy of it, but so when we first, we have our all exchanges, and when we first started building out from our exchange, we built what we call fibre to the cabinet. So we would take fibre from the exchange to the cabinet and then copper into the rest of your house. And we did that for 1.6 million homes, and kind of coming out from the urban areas pretty much. But then, and so that's the kind of exchange area. And then through the exchanges, there's all these ribbons which get you into rural. So the 340,000 kind of goes into those rural ribbons, and MBP, continues those urban ribbons down. So our fibre to the cabinet is only fibre, as I said, to the cabinet. But we've just announced, and we're just in design mode now, we're going to overbuild that fibre to the cabinet network and put fibre to the home everywhere in the cities. Pretty much every town with more than 1,000 premises in it. So that, as I said, we're designing at the moment, and the first homes passed will be there January 2020.
And how long would it take to get to all those houses?
It'll take, well, that's 1.4 million, so that'll take us 5 years. So in terms of efforts, the way our team, so when we were building rural, we get an average about 30,000 a quarter. So for the same effort in urban and suburban, you get about 75,000, because they're closer together. The fibre lengths are shorter, so it's just a more efficient build. And that is the challenge, to be fair, for the intervention footprint. The distances get bigger, as I said, to do the 440,000 rural premises, you're going to have to do 3 times the amount of fibre we did in the 300,000 or the 340,000. So, the distances get much longer.
Okay. But so, you could characterise the moment that in the more urban areas, where I'm living, is getting fibre to the cabinet. Yeah. The 340,000 areas getting a superior product.
The best one, yeah, that's right.
And without a huge price differential because of that. No. That letter that Richard Moate wrote to the Minister at the time, and setting out the reasons why, and if I'm summarising, the main reasons were because, in a sense, in the NBI, you would lose your own retail business, not just on the broadband, but you'd lose your copper retail business. Well, you're going to lose that anyway, but you wouldn't have you wouldn't have the opportunity of having a retail business as well as a wholesale. You'd have to create a whole new wholesale business.
So it wasn't really about retail at all, I suppose. So I was the MD of wholesale when this project kicked off. So I led it at the start, and with the ambition, as I said, to win it all. And the team had engaged with the department for 18 months on, as the gap funding model evolved and developed, and we understood what it meant in terms of, so it wasn't really about retail, it wasn't a retail issue for us, it was a wholesale issue. The department, and as part of that level playing field, did not want our established wholesale business to sell in the intervention footprint. So they wanted us to set up a new wholesale business to sell in the intervention footprint. So that's, people, systems, all, so that was one issue. The department wanted us to offer better SLAs in the intervention footprint than we currently, and so it was adding all that sort of cost and complexity. And when you're trying to recommend that to a board, very difficult, because it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of commercially.
But the wholesale price itself wouldn't have been that different.
No, it wasn't a wholesale pricing issue, because we just take our pricings as regulated, so we just accept that. It was all the incremental cost of and the complexity of managing another wholesale business, and we have fantastic, we're the biggest wholesaler in the country, we have fantastic expertise, and we didn't want to have to recreate that. And we'd spent 18 months raising these issues and got no traction. So in the summer before the ISDS was due in September, Richard contacted the Minister.
So ISDS is?
It was the technical submission that we did. It was a big, it was created about this size of kind of papers went over. So Richard wanted to flag those issues, in advance of that, and he did that. We then put in that technical kind of bid, and then we waited for the next version of the contract to come out, hoping that some of those commercial issues that we've been highlighting had been addressed as part of that. So a new version came out in January, 1,400 pages, but unfortunately there was a few small changes, but none of our big commercial issues that he'd raised had been addressed. And the next stage was us to put in our commercial bid, and in doing that we had to say that we were accepting all the commercial terms and conditions. So we couldn't in good faith do that. So Richard then requested to meet the Minister, a former Minister, and met him and said we were pulling out. And obviously the Minister was very disappointed by that and asked him to have a think about it. But, he wrote then at the end of January and said, we weren't going to change our minds. Now, I saw some coverage today, it was to do the new shareholders. It was absolutely nothing to do with the new shareholders. They hadn't bought us until April. This was all the old board that made the decision, and the old board were very close to this process. We were in and out a lot, kind of explaining it to them. And, and I suppose the view was, if in 18 months we hadn't got any changes, we were unlikely in the month or so that was left between the final bid and having to, accept those commercial T's and C's to get any changes. So in the end, we kind of decided, we weren't going to be able to change anything here, so we pulled out.
It's hard to believe, though, you wouldn't contact the new owners, given that, okay, you didn't take over until April, but it was clear they were going to get the ownership. Yeah, but they, until they own the business, they can't make any of those decisions. They weren't on the board or whatever. So, they accepted the recommendation of our board, but it was the board who made the decision because they were the ones who were close to it. Okay, just two other questions, if I can, Chair. Taoiseach said today in the Dáil in response to questions that the Air had put in a bid which was very similar to the NBI bid. So that indicative bid you're talking about prior to that January process.
So remember that was the ISDS. So that was a technical kind of bid. Here's our technical solution, and in that we put in all those costings that were required, the cost of the ducts and poles, the cost of the wholesale team. We put all those in as part of it, which made it an expensive bid. We were still hoping to get those addressed. And the other thing was we made some assumptions around uptake. So I don't know what MBI's assumptions around uptake are, but in preparation for bidding an MVP, we did a survey of the intervention area to try and understand how many of the homes in it were actually occupied homes, because that uptake is depending on if there's people living there. And the data we got back was that about 25% of the houses weren't occupied. They were holiday homes or various other things or whatever. So we based our uptake assumptions on that sort of 75% rather than 100%. And obviously that's in that gap funding model, that's a factor. So, but that was part of that sort of technical kind of submission. Here's how we're going to do it. Getting down to the negotiation was meant to be in that final commercial bid when you signed up to those T's and C's.
Okay. Richard Mote wrote to the Minister saying we can't continue because of all these commercial arrangements that our board doesn't cancel.
And we could do this at a fraction of the cost.
We could do the fraction. You say you didn't hear back from the Minister?
No, we didn't. There was no further follow-up from that. And then we had our new shareholders on board, and then we came up with our own plan to turn the machine onto a national build.
But you must have had contact with the department. Did the department get back to you?
No, well, not in terms of any other role or a different model. We're in touch with the department all the time because we keep them up to date on where we are, the 300,000, and also we work with the remaining bidder because it looks like largely they'll be using our infrastructure to roll out. So we interact with the department because of that, but there was never any discussion about an alternative model or further investigation in terms of that price.
But so Mr. Mote's letter finished with the offer, we could do this for a fraction of the price, and you heard nothing back from the Minister?
No.
It's just incredible. Can I ask just two other questions? Sure. You intimated there that on your current arrangement in the 340,000 area zone, that you do it if you can overhead. If someone's put ducting in, they're going to have to pay the additional cost. Is your understanding that the MBI scheme is similarly overhead wires, or is there a higher percentage of ducting?
So I think they're going to go much further in terms of that, that connection. I mean, we set ourselves kind of strict rules in terms of what we do. I think my understanding is they will be open to ducting, but also my understanding is they plan to charge €100 for it, no matter how big your driveway is or kind of what they do. Our price is higher. It's a regulated price, but it's €170.
But why would they put in ducting, given the cost is so much higher?
A question for MBI. Yeah.
Okay. Just last question then. You say in your presentation today that the other way that it could be done was with the universal service obligation, and that would be a policy direction from the state, Comreg, setting out the basic rules. Yeah. That wouldn't breach, we're not breaching any EU competition rules. In a sense, it's giving a wholesale monopoly to yourselves and our continuing extended monopoly in a sense.
I might use the word obligation rather than monopoly. So I don't think it would. USOs for this have been done in other countries. You'd have to agree the funding model, you'd have to agree the rules. Comreg would have to come up with the rules, it would have to be monitored in terms of what is done. But we have a USO today on the fixed access side, to apply that. But, I think we would all agree that broadband and fibre broadband is probably much more relevant today than the fixed access product where a lot of us are using our mobiles.
Just last comment, I said, just comment something else. I mean, it's spectacular. This debate has been so public in the last few months, particularly. This committee has been having a variety of different hearings. You say that there's nothing new in this announcement of a billion way of doing it, but to be honest, I don't know other members of the committee, but it's kind of remarkable what we're hearing today in a way, given the public debate, that this hasn't been more openly assessed.
But I suppose, we flagged all along our challenges. We pulled out, we said we could do it for a fraction of the cost. There was no further engagement with us. We got on with our own plans. We were invited in here, we came in here, we set out our stall. We were invited into PAC, we went into PAC, we told PAC it could be done cheaper. Anytime we've ever been interviewed, we've said that. We're back in here, we were asked 3 questions, cost, rollout and ownership, we've answered them. But we're now outside of this MVP process and kind of, I suppose to some extent paddling our own canoe in terms of what we're doing, on the plans, and supporting MBI in terms of access to our infrastructure. So, we're kind of getting on with our job and, leaving, the MVP to the department and the remaining bidder.
Senator Rose.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your opening statement. So basically what you're saying is that the tendering and the procurement process, which was selected by government, has cost taxpayers an additional €2 billion.
So I'm saying that the model that and the process that they ended up with, which was a model of, making all things equal, almost like you're building a greenfield network and not taking into account there's actually infrastructure there today. There's 300,000 infrastructure that you can leverage, and also the requirements for better SLA. I don't understand why we want to give a better SLA in rural Ireland than we do in the rest of the country. But those decisions have driven costs, and they were always going to.
So basically the monetary cost of it is an extra €2 billion from what you're telling us here today.
Yeah.
I mean, that has absolutely serious implications. Now, I would have to say in terms of air and people's experience with air, in getting a phone answered or getting a poll moved. Have you ever tried to get a poll moved by air?
No. Well, obviously, I see the letters, and I know there has been.
I have.
There has been, we have, last October, we announced a decision to bring our contact centres back in-house, having been outsourced to outsourced service providers for certainly longer than I've been in air. And also to close our contact centre in Dublin, where we couldn't retain staff because there's just so many job choices. And we did that, and we've now set up in rural hubs in Sligo and Limerick and Cork. But certainly, when we were transitioning from the outsourced provider, we had extremely long call answering times and call waiting times.
Yes.
But I mean, we launched it in Sligo. I was down there last week. We're back now to 90 seconds. It's, I apologise profusely to customers, but I believe the long-term strategy of having people who look after your customers working for you is right. And unfortunately, when you close a contact centre in Dublin, you can't expect people to hang around until you've got it ready to go in Sligo, Limerick and Cork. So it's been really unfortunate. But I do believe, we're back on track now, and it's the right way forward. So
you're saying now by air, all calls will be answered within 90 seconds?
Well, I was looking at the numbers for yesterday today, and all lines were answered, and some of them on tech support were answered in 30 seconds. So, we are back on track.
It's been years of torment for people who have been trying to contact the main telecommunications.
I agree, and one of the reasons we decided to make that strategic decision to bring it back in-house is because we felt we had to fix it, because it had never been good. And that's the call we've made, and I think this is the right way,
So you can see then why, when Air come out and say they can deliver this for less than €1 billion, people's eyebrows are raised, I suppose, and as part of this committee to get to the bottom of it. But you could also look at this in another way, in terms of you pulling out of the tendering process in 2017. Had you not got what you wanted at that stage, you were allowed to cherry pick the 300,000 most lucrative homes in rural Ireland. And could it not have been that derailed the whole process?
So absolutely not. I mean, you may say cherry pick. I would say we picked the next most commercially viable homes because we were making a commercial investment. But I remind everybody again, the department wrote to every operator in the country and said, we want to finalise this intervention footprint. Have you any plans to do more commercially? A number of operators submitted plans, but the only operator who was willing to sign a commitment agreement and actually went ahead and delivered all those plans was Air. It's 250 million of our money. If nobody goes onto the network, that's my problem. I take all the risk. If nobody connects, 250 million. And, that has moved Eir from a provision of rural broadband right up to the top, percentile in Europe on the back of our investment. So I take your point on the service, but if you again look at the chart that we have presented here, we've spent higher percentage of our capital on investment in infrastructure in Ireland over the last, I don't know how many years, than all of the big telcos in the country. So we are putting the money in, and it is improving infrastructure in Ireland. So, as I say, if we were one of the Googles or Facebooks, there'd be a statue to us. But, we have history and people are sceptical. But the proof is in the pudding. There's, there'll be 340,000, there's already 315,000, but there'll be 340,000 farms, businesses and families who can get access to fibre to the home on the back of Eir's investment.
And I appreciate that, but also even people working within your own organisation who would agree that the underinvestment in things simple as wires hanging from poles and poles half knocked over and all that, just trying to get any of those done. Like, the lack of investment is very visible, I think, in rural Ireland, outside your broadband, the 300,000 homes. How much are you getting for the poles and the ducts? The use of the poles and the ducts?
So over the 25 years of the MBP rollout, Eir will get €1 billion. Yeah. It will cost us 900 million to replace and to repair and to look after those ducts. We will actually spend, in the initial 7 years, about 200 million upfront, to get that done. And that, from what I read in the papers, that seems to be more than the equity investment of MBI. So, we make a regulated return. Our ducts and poles are set at regulated prices. The regulator decides those prices, and they're cost orientated. They're based on the cost required to maintain a pole and duct network in rural Ireland. So, they're not set by me.
But you're already getting 1/3 of the total state subsidy for using the existing network, is that right?
Well, I think the subsidy is, the cost is it's 20% of the subsidy, but it is our infrastructure. It'll have to be maintained. In the 300,000, we had to replace over 60,000 poles. When Ophelia hit us there recently, 2 years ago, we had to place 2,500 poles. So there's a lot of get ready of ducts and poles have to be done for MBI to use that network.
But you would have to do that anyway, would you not?
Well, no, because if you're not stringing extra fibre on that network, you're not going to be replacing as many poles as you would just a standard replacement process. We will, and also this is not, and again I think there's a bit of confusion in this. This is not incremental revenue. We make money out of copper customers on that network today. We will lose that revenue when those copper customers migrate onto MBI's fibre network. So if that happens, we will be making no money in that intervention area to maintain those poles and ducts. So we will make that money through renting the poles and ducts to MBI, and over 25 years we'll get paid $1 billion, we'll spend 900 million, so we'll make an 8% return.
It's hardly commercially viable, isn't it? Even on those figures. Who's the main shareholder of Eir as it is at the moment?
NJJ is our major shareholder. I wouldn't consider it highly commercially viable. It's actually a wash for us. The revenue we lose from losing the copper customers is replaced by revenue we get from maintaining ducts and poles. So. Okay.
So in 2016, the public spending code benchmark figure for the deal that we're talking about was set at 800 million, and today's state subsidy stands at 2.97 billion. Is it not fair to say that the reason for the cost to the taxpayer spiralling out of control was, in fact, a consequence of the deal that you secured with Fine Gael in 2017? Around the 300,000.
So I know that's been put out there, but I fundamentally disagree with it, because and what people have done there is they've taken out the revenue associated with the 300,000 but left in the costs, whereas we've actually picked up the bill for the costs and gone ahead and built the network, and actually we've built 40,000 more. So you can take another 40,000 out of the intervention footprint if you want, and there's no cost to the taxpayer to do those because we've already done them. And I mean, I think if you look at that KPMG report, KPMG actually backed that up.
You'll forgive me if I don't have ultimate confidence in KPMG, particularly when we talk about Crillian and many other organisations. Last week, the government's technical advisor on the National Broadband Plan confirmed to us at this committee that the most significant factor behind the state subsidy multiplying from the 800 million to the 3 billion was again the decision. That's what they said. They gave two reasons for this. They said the remaining bidder would have no guarantee that it would be able to use AIR's infrastructure in that part of the intervention area, and would therefore have to build its own network side by side of AIR to reach the homes where AIR choose to reject. And this would come as a huge capital cost. And secondly, they said that the remaining bidder would be prohibited from selling their products to any consumer in AIR's intervention area. Therefore, the state could not generate any revenue in that area, even though it had to build a network through it. So what sense would that make to the remaining bidder? So
just on the first point, I do not understand that statement by the consultant or the bidder, because the passive product that I talked about in the 300,000, the exact same rules apply to that passive product, regulated pricing and access that apply to the poles and duct product that the bidder was happy to use. So I don't know, I don't understand why they could say we can't have guarantee or rules on that product over there. You know, all those products are regulated, so you know exactly the same rules apply to poles and ducts, and certainly MBI are very happy to use our pole and duct product. So I don't understand that one.
And then for the second part, the AIR's intervention area and what they said about that, could you speak to that?
Well, I suppose it would be our understanding that when state aid rules apply, that you know where subsidy has, you know, that you can't apply a subsidy to a model where there's already commercial investment. So since AIR has already rolled out to the 300,000. I don't think it would be reasonable to subsidise MBI to, you know, to connect customers in that area. But I think that applies to all state aid sort of subsidy.
So would it not have been better then not to give the 300,000 in the first place?
Well, I think
Keep
there's 300. Well, I think there's 315,000 and soon to be 340,000 of farms, business, and families have access to fibre to the home today, and nothing's happened on MVP. You know, and again, all. You know, at AIR's cost, 250 million, no taxpayers' subsidy, no state subsidy, no risk to the state. All the risk is on us if nobody goes onto that network. So again, you know, we answered a request from the department, we made a decision, we've delivered what we said we were going to do, and you know, I'm proud of the work we've done there, to be honest. You know, the reality is we would have built it anyway, whether we had signed a commitment agreement or not. But the department were very keen for us to sign a commitment agreement and to agree to 300, just over 300,000 specific AIR codes. If I was doing it again, I wouldn't agree to 300,000 specific AIR codes, because when you get out to build in rural Ireland, you find there are things that stop you going down certain roads in terms of way leaves or whatever, and you know, it can be time consuming and not as efficient as just picking the most effective kind of 300,000. But you know, the department were keen for us to sign it, and we signed it.
And there's 542,000 households without connectivity. And they're obviously the people we're concerned about here today. I think I'll leave the question at that moment.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Deputy Fitzmaurice.
Thanks for your presentation. First of all, in relation to your map of Castlecomer, why have you gone out one road a large distance? I understood that from where you'd be supplying the broadband from, that you could go 2 kilometres either way. Why is it gone completely sort of one leg down one road? It's just to notice it there. Second of all, just to be clear on this, you were saying that the way AIR was doing it in their or with the way they're doing the 300,000, that it's €170 the customer pays. Under the National Broadband Plan, it's €100. That's €70 more. Secondly, you are bringing it to wire, I know that, and if a person brings it by duct to where the pole is, are you saying that under the National Broadband Plan there was a clause in it that it had to be brought to within so many metres of a house, or brought right to the house in every place? Thirdly, can you clarify something for me, because if you have 200 million in your back pocket, and you rock up and you decide you have the gear that you're going to put broadband somewhere, do you have to go for a licence? Have you get authority for it, or can you do it of your own initiative? And the reason I ask you that is that we sat in for 83 days or 85 days of government talks, and we were told categorically within those talks that you would not get the contract that you were looking for the simple reason that it would affect the overall project of the whole National Broadband Plan, and that a licence wouldn't be issued. Can you clarify, were we being misled, that you can decide to go off, or I can if I have money and I have the infrastructure, and decide what part of Ireland, if I want to go to somewhere else, that I can go and give that broadband to anybody? Did at any stage over the last, say, 2 years before you came out of the process, when you highlighted the situation that you weren't comfortable with, was there any negotiation with the department that they were willing to change, or were they just stuck on this sort of set of rules that they were in? If it were changed in the morning, as other deputies have said, if the whole scenario changed, how quickly could we have the likes of year rollout system put into place, guaranteed that to be delivered, if the situation at the moment was put on pause and someone sat down with the likes of ye or some other provider? How quickly could we put it in place? Would we be 2 years again looking at each other trying to wonder when another announcement would come? Are you saying to me, and I want to be clear on this, that under the procurement situation or the procurement document that the department was working with G on, that you would have to have in one floor of your building your business at the moment, and then other people would have to be put up on the next floor as a separate entity, that they couldn't really talk to the ones on the bottom, extra staff, new setup, new building, away from everybody, because it was the National Broadband Plan? And how much of a problem over the last year, 18 months, while you're rolling out the 300,000 or 340,000, has it been with councils in the line of licences? How much of a problem has that been to set up? Right. We have a major problem right around rural parts of Ireland. When Telecom Éireann came round years ago, or the P&T, people let them put poles along their ditches or their fields or whatever. And I see GAA clubs, and I see people that might be widening a road, or somebody building a house. And first of all, to get you is the first thing, to get someone to come out and do it. And second of all, at the prices that you're charging at the moment, it is disgusting for people that gave ye ground years ago, or not ye, it was before you bought the business. It is disgusting to see the way people are being treated. You might be widening a bend, council might be trying to do it, in a town where they are now trying to revamp towns, be it taking down air wires or ESP wires. It is costing a phenomenal amount of money. Why isn't there some sort of a goodwill gesture there to make sure that these jobs can be done to communities that's actually struggling for funding? And I would ask you as CEO of it, or to consider doing some sort of a look at that, especially in the rural areas. And would you, how long would you, if you were to get a contract in the morning, we live in a fantasy world, how long would it take you, in your estimation, to roll out the whole, to the 540,000 houses that they talk about? And were you disappointed more with the Minister or the Department at the given time that they didn't come back to you to try and resolve the issues that were in place?
A lot of questions there, so you might take note of your questions, Deputy, as to make sure they're being answered. Is that okay?
Yeah, well, I think of them.
Yeah.
So my colleague Ed has kindly written them all down, so I'll try and go through them one by one. So in terms of on the map, you say why was one blue line shorter than the others? Because what we're trying to do is get the roads with the most density. So we're trying to cover, we had 300,000, with the budget for 300,000, the budget of 250 million, we'd agreed to do 300,000. So it's all based on density. So you look at the yellow kind of pin, that's our exchange. The kind of yellow kind of circle around it, that's our fibre to the cabinet footprint, and those ribbon roads coming out. So in every kind of exchange, we kind of said how many can we pick up, the max we can pick up across that exchange. So that's how we did it.
Tough luck if you were out some other road because you weren't in this distance. Is that it?
Absolutely. But the reality is, if it wasn't tough luck, I would have been building a 400,000 network, and I would have been over my 250 million budget, and I'd be delayed. So, and every day I get requests from people to extend it a bit. But the problem is, if I extend it for one, I extend it for the other. And as in reality, we did extend it because in the end we're going to do 340,000. But that's the reason.
Okay.
So in terms of the next one was on the connection. So the connection charge is charged to the operator. So we charge €170 to the operator. The operator then decides if they're going to pass that connection charge on to the consumer. Some operators, as part of their proposition, say, free connection charge. Others pass on some of it. So our connection charge to the operator is €170. And our understanding is that the MVI connection charge to the operator is €100.
Okay.
Licence, no, we don't need a licence. So if we decided tomorrow we wanted to do another 100,000, we need licences to open roads and, the things you need licences for. But in terms of if we decided that we, instead of going back into urban and suburban, we wanted to go further into rural, we could make that decision and go and do it. So no,
just clarify one thing for me, and I don't want to be interrupting you. We were told at the time that you wouldn't be given the licence, and then it came out later on that the EU forced the Irish government to give you to let you do what you were going doing, for the simple reason they wouldn't be allowed to include it in the intervention area. So
I think that sounds more like it, rather than you wouldn't give us a licence, because my understanding is you can't get state aid monies if a commercial investment has already gone in there. So yeah, so that sounds.
We were told lies, to be honest about it.
Yeah. Sorry, where am I now? So I suppose we've always, the next one is if the scenario kind of changed and you were back in it, how long would it take you to get up? And I think it would take the minimum of a year to come up with another way of doing this and to get the kind of ducks in a row to get started on it. Certainly, if any involvement we would have in future rolling out in rural Ireland, we would be leveraging our 300,000 builds, the additional fibres that are there and the additional connection points. So that means you can kind of get going from there. As part of going to all those exchanges, we have fibre backhaul to a lot of those exchanges, and that can be a big chunk of work, but we've done a lot of that already as part of our rural 300,000 rollout. But, to come up with a new model and to get people around the table, those things unfortunately don't happen as quick as many of us might like them. So on the duplication of wholesale, yes, the idea was, so our wholesale team at the moment sells right across the country, sells our network right across the country. The idea there would be that we would have a separate wholesale team. We didn't discuss separate buildings, but like with a line between them, and that they would be the only people allowed to sell in the intervention footprint. So that provides, apart from cost and all that, but so for example, the IFA are a customer of ours. Their farmers are in, the 300,000, there's a chunk of them in the intervention footprint, and there's some in the suburban. We offer an overall service to them with an account manager, that does all that for them. In this new model, we would have had some of them being looked at in the new wholesale division, looking after the intervention area, plus some of them being looked at in the 300,000. So, just offering that customer an all country solution, which we do today, was going to be a challenge, never mind the cost. And the other bidders didn't have that, because they didn't have established wholesale businesses like we did, so they didn't have that kind of, I suppose, that loophole to get through. Yeah, so we did have some difficulties with licences for councils. We, as I said, we're at 315,000 today. Some of the original 300,000 that we signed off with the department haven't been delivered. They will be delivered over the summer, but a lot of that was to do with way leaves and licences. And I feel we got some unreasonable requests. So one council said they wouldn't give us some way leaves until we finished stuff they wanted us to do in urban, even though it was about our rural piece or whatever. So yeah, that is an issue. Some are better than others. Some smooth things on.
What council was that?
I'll have to check. on the pole issue and moving them, I don't know the details. I will look into it. I'm not promising you'll love my answer, but I will definitely look into it properly. So, I think there were two more. I think if we got the contract, how long would it take? You know, I've always said this is going to take 5 to 7 years, and we're actually building a national fibre network, so we would have to increase our capacity in terms of that. What was that? More disappointment in the department or the minister. I think we were disappointed with the engagement with the department over the 18 months because I think we thought we were raising very valid issues, you know, that should have been resolved. Our sense was that the department never thought that we'd pull out. And it was, even though it shouldn't have been a surprise, I think it was a surprise when we did pull out. And so we were disappointed not to get more engagement there. I mean, by the end, we spent over 70 million on this bid, and we were in it for a very long time. So, 17, sorry. Not 70. We were in it for a very long time, and you know we wanted to win it. We didn't really. We obeyed the protocol with the minister, so we didn't have that much engagement with the minister on the subject. And it was only really the former CEO, Richard Mote, when we were pulling out, I suppose out of courtesy, requested a meeting and then communicated with him.
Was there a meeting?
Yeah, there was. And at that meeting, he said that we would pull out, and then he followed up with a formal letter about a week later.
Senator Lombard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I must apologise, Air, and explain why I was absent. We had votes in the Shannon, and the way this House works, some refrain.
You have to be there.
Indeed. So look, my apologies, and
No
I think
problem.
that's something I just need to acknowledge. So I missed some of your presentation, so if I'm repeating, please forgive me, okay? Could I ask in particular about the €1 billion that we've heard a lot about? Could you break down exactly where that figure is coming from, how you estimate the build-out would be €1 billion? Is that build-out connection, does that include maintaining the service for 35 years actually, if you went to contract through? Does it include that? Does it include all the aspects of the actual bid? And was that €1 billion in your actual tender documents that you submitted first day?
So first of all, so where the €1 billion comes from, it comes from us applying the same criteria to building in the intervention footprint for those rural homes as we've applied in the bill for the 300,000. So we would use the additional fibre that we built as part of our 300,000 rollout, and we'd use those connection points that also exist to further extend out into the intervention area. We'd use all our own poles and ducts. Obviously, they're in place. We'd use our access team, our build and design team, and the current contractors we have in place, and we'd use our own wholesale team to sell the products. We'd apply the same connection model that we do in the 300,000, i.e. we charge an operator €170, and we would also the connection rules that we apply. So, for example, if you want a connection in our 300,000, we'll do an overhead connection for you. We will not build duct for you. We will pull fibre to an existing duct, but if it's blocked, we ask you to unblock it. And if you don't want overhead and you want underground, we will ask you to supply your own duct. So applying all of those criteria, we'd also apply the same repair SLA that we have in terms of the 300,000 and the rest of the country to the intervention footprint, and we'd apply the same regulated pricing. So we're just finishing building 340,000. We have a really good grip on the costs.
And was that in your original contract? Your original?
So I'll come to that in a second. So the other question you asked me, does that connect the home? Yes, it connects the home. So it passes and connects the home, and VAT is included.
So what has changed between the statement and your tender document?
So the different. So first of all, that ISDS was a technical kind of bid, and the process that we were involved in with the department was not that kind of process where we could use all the stuff that we already have, like our ducts and poles, our 300,000, to our advantage in the bid.
But you said previously that money, there was 1,000 technicians that were servicing it, so somebody has to pay for them at some stage.
No, agreed, but the model that the department had was a model where it equalised everything. So in that technical bid, we put in the cost of the ducts and poles, we put in the cost of a separate wholesale organisation, we put in the connection cost that the department wanted, we put in cheaper pricing.
And what was your bid?
So our bid was close to 3 billion, but that's what all those costs in that model we wouldn't build it with that model. We'd build it with the model we used the 300,000 for. So it can be done for under £1 billion, but not in the gap funding model.
Your original documentation put in for a €3 billion, which included rental, which you said previously involved. I'm not sure how many workmen was involved.
There's 1,000 guys in our repair team.
1,000, so they'll have to be paid anyway.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be free because it's air. They'll have to be paid anyway.
But the difference.
So if you're to take that into consideration. And taking what did that €1 billion also include the VAT on top of this entire service?
No, that's included. But so the model, that bid or that technical submission was trying to be compliant with the procurement model that the department wanted us to be compliant with. What I'm saying is, if you said to me, here's €1 billion, go build fibre to the home in rural Ireland tomorrow, I would say, OK, but I will do it on the criteria that I built the 300,000 with. Now, that's not the same criteria that the department wanted for the procurement process. So, the SLAs aren't as good.
Could I ask about the actual contract, so the original contract for the 300 and whatever thousand houses?
340,000, in the end,
They were, how big was that contract?
So, in
pages, was it 50, 200?
42.
42. And now the contract, this is a massive sum of money.
The last one, I think, was 1,400 pages, the one that came in at the January.
So, we're on about a totally different machine. We're on we're on about having large sums of government money, our money really, going into something. So we had to make sure it was going to be tied up, that it was going to be. So it's a different machine. So do you think it was appropriate that we should have the solutions that have been talked about, in other words, a comprehensive solution tied into that legal document, or would you prefer a smaller document?
So I suppose for me it's not about the size of the document. I think the gap funding model was picked at the start because the view was that would give the best competitive tension and outcome. In reality, because it created a level playing field, advantages that someone like we have because we own infrastructure, we have it there today to use. We're taking it, and that's okay. You might say that, well, that's fine, it's fair, whatever. But that drives the cost, and then it's not my decision to decide whether that's right or wrong. But that's what happened. In reality, I would be absolutely certain if I had €1 billion cheque tomorrow, I could build and connect those homes because we're just coming to the end of having done it for 340,000.
And would you prefer the National Broadband Company would be set up to run that, or would it be a air open company to run it?
Well, I suppose, but we're talking about two different things. I mean, we pulled out of the National Broadband Plan because the process wasn't working for us in terms of the complexity and the cost and the overhead and the risk into the rest of our business. As long as that process still exists, we won't be part of that and we will focus on our national build. But I suppose the question we were asked by the committee was, we were asked to comment on the cost of doing this, how long it's going to take, and the ownership. And, and we've done that. And when we pulled out, Richard wrote to the minister and told him that we could do this for a fraction of the cost that were talked about at the time. But, the department decided to continue with that process because that's the process they want to use. And that's for them to decide. It's not for me to decide. But I'm just telling you, based on my experience of building in rural Ireland, if I apply exactly the same rules, and they're not the same rules that are in the MEP process, I accept that. But if I apply those rules, I can pass and connect those homes for less than $1 billion.
But that's probably the issue. We're on a totally different kind of a proposal here. The 350,000 homes would mainly be, as you said previously, mainly urban homes.
No, they're rural. No.
In a rural setting. In other words, clusters of houses.
No. Look, I mean, look at our map. Look at our map.
It's an urban home in a rural setting.
Sorry,
it's
Deputy.
Clusters of houses.
They're not clusters. Look at them.
So a two-storey is more expensive to connect it than a bungalow?
Just let Senator Lombard finish his questioning.
So what I was trying to get the point across was the 300,000 homes in my area, in particular, were basically made up of settlements, made up of large, in many ways, tracts of once-off housing. No offence, bad planning back in the 70s and 80s, right? If we were to be very honest about the whole thing. That's the main kind of line of what was connected. I'll give you an example. Like the constituency I would service is 130, 140 miles long. It goes all down to Castown Bear, all the way beyond it into Allies, and I start Kinsale.
Yep.
So, remember, a huge geographical area. So when it comes to housing up and connected, I'm the most peripheral of them all. So what my point really was, when you look at actually what was being proposed here, vast areas of country, vast areas of population, like the actual need, when you talk about 350,000 houses, the area compared to what's been connected in my part of the world to the area that's not been connected, you could not compare.
So just a couple of points there. So firstly, I think it isn't all clustered, because if you look at, like, we have laid or strung 27,000 kilometres of fibre. So if they were all kind of grouped in clusters, you know, we wouldn't have needed 27,000 kilometres. So this is rural, and it is down those rural ribbons. But what I do agree with you is the next tranche, the intervention footprint, the distribution is much more scarce. So, and the point I made earlier, they'll have to string 3 times the amount of fibre that we strung to cover those homes. So that just gives you a sense of how much more distributed they are and how more spread out. And of course that drives the cost, and it drives the time to do it. And it will drive some harder connections as well, because some of them will be a lot more remote. But, you know, I would hate people to think that the 300,000 was urban. It isn't. It's quite rural.
Quite
but
rural.
not as rural as...
Yes.
I mean, those fibre alleys, though, because they won one of our competitions.
Exactly,
so
yeah. But like you look at places like Mizen Head all day long, really remote parts of the world. Like, it takes me 3 hours to drive to constituency to give you an idea of what we're dealing with geographically. So I do think, you know, there's a kind of slight difference here. Can I ask about the 350,000 plus houses? Are we on target for them to be delivered?
So what we agreed with the department was just over 300,000, and that was due to be finished by June. So we've actually delivered 315,000, but some of the original air codes that we agreed with the department have not been delivered yet, because we've had some way leave and access problems. But by the end of the summer, by the end of August, we've done all the civil work, we've done all the poles and all that. We just have to splice. By the end of August, we have 340,000 done. And that will be everything that was in the original agreement with the department, plus close to another 39,000. And that'll all be done by the summer. And to be honest, we've spent all our money now. The splicing is kind of the cheapest part, and we only make money if we get people connected to the network. So it's in our absolute interest to get it finished now. And we're also doing the design work for our national build, with the first homes passed on the national build in January.
And could I ask about, and I'll leave it just now, well, not leave, I'll just refrain for a while. Could I ask about if we were to re-tender the entire process? KPMG came to this meeting 3 weeks ago. I might be wrong on my dates. I'm sure the chair will correct me. She informed the spokesperson from that organisation informed us that, in her opinion, if we were to start a re-tendering process and go through the entire amount of work, and I'm open to clarification now, it would take 5 years for the re-tendering process to actually start and finish. Yeah, thanks for I wasn't 100% sure. On that timelines, which we will have heard at this hearings, would ye be in the market? Would ye be if there was to be a re-tender? Would ye re-tender now, or where would ye fit in this actual setup?
So if there was a re-tender under a new model that made commercial sense to us, yes, we would re-tender. But 5 years seems a very long time.
Well, that was the
Deputy Kate O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just following on actually from Senator Lombard's question, so the re-tendering would obviously, in case I'm misinterpreting it, the gap funding model is really the issue here from the start. So the re-tendering would have to be under a totally different setup if that were to happen.
If that made sense, yeah.
In terms of what's to say that, just let's say if it was 5 as per the witness that came in, what's to say if it all was parked and was all restarted, and if there's a different funding model that was suitable to what your requirements are as a company, that 3 years into it, your parent company wouldn't say, you know, forget it. That's because I know you were bought over in April, and your new French owner made commentary that your focus was in urban development. So I'm just saying, as a company, it is possible that perhaps, based on what's happened at this committee, that it could be re-tendered, but who's to say some part into the project that you could walk? Isn't that fair to say?
Well, I think if we signed up to something and to deliver something and signed a contract, we'd be committed to doing it, and there would be no reason to say that. I mean, our new owners have bought us and want to hold us into perpetuity.
Yeah, but technically speaking, as a private company, the
But
trajectory
no different
of the company could change.
But no different to any other private company that might change their minds. But, you know, if we signed a contract, we'd be committed to it.
Yeah, but that would be as the main wholesale company. There was a requirement that it be a separate entity to deliver the broadband.
So, no, to sell? To sell the broadband, yeah.
So the new this virtual new model, and would it have to have got rid of that point?
Yeah, so we certainly would not sign up to a model where we had a separate wholesale team.
Okay.
Yeah, it wouldn't make any sense for us. Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of this 1 billion cost that's in the papers today versus the 3 billion, maybe I misheard you, but did you say at some point here today that it would take 900 million to upgrade the poles and the ducts?
Over the 25 years.
Over the 25 years.
Over the 25 years of the contract, yes.
So of a 1 billion cheque in your back pocket, 900 million will be going over 25 years to upgrade the poles and ducts. And with my sums, we've 100 million left to do upgrades, to pay the VAT. That sum couldn't be correct.
No, that is right. I mean, but the poles, if we were doing it, those ducts and poles are ours. We don't have to, you know, so we own them. You know.
And have you made a value? Have you attributed a value to the existing poles in this 1 billion figure?
No, because we get revenue off them. I suppose. So today we make money on the network, the customers on our copper network on those ducts and poles. So we make revenue, and that revenue pays for the maintenance of our ducts and poles, and they're regulated. The prices are regulated. The regulator sets them, and they set them on cost. So if tomorrow we were building it out, it was our build and not someone else's build. We would migrate those copper customers onto this new fibre network, and the revenue we'd get for them on the fibre network would pay for the maintenance of the ducts and poles.
Your copper customers are getting phone from the copper wires providing a certain amount of service.
Yeah, because when you roll out a fibre network, you'll get rid of the copper because you don't want to maintain two networks, and fibre is much more resilient than copper. It's better with lightning, better with water, so it'll offer a much better experience. So we would migrate those copper customers onto the fibre network, and we would have that revenue, and we could use that revenue.
You haven't attributed any cost in the 1 billion for the use of those poles?
No, because there are poles, and as I said, we've applied exactly the same model that we applied for the 300,000 to if we wanted to build that national broadband plan. In a world where MBI is successful and goes on to build that network, they migrate our copper customers onto a fibre network. We lose that revenue, so we no longer have that revenue to maintain our ducts and poles, but we get rental revenue from MBI, and that's what covers it. So for us, we lose revenue over there in terms of copper rental, and we gain revenue over here in terms of renting our ducts and poles. Again, all regulated prices.
But there's still no figure included in your 1 billion.
No, because they're ours.
For the use, because you're using them already.
Yeah.
But that's, I suppose, assuming that the company wouldn't be split from the wholesale.
But no plans to do anything like that.
Yeah. So really, it doesn't fit with what the requirement is by the government, because it's specifically set out that the interest has only to be in the provision of broadband. So what you're saying couldn't technically happen under the current...
I don't understand the question.
So maybe I'm not explaining it right. That AIR is to have the company, the NBI, the National Broadband Company, that their sole interest would be in the delivery. There would be no competition. There wouldn't be a larger company with other interests.
Well, certainly the criteria they said for us was they wanted a part of our organisation would be to be successful, to be only focused on selling in the national broadband intervention area. And as I said, because we offer a cross-country service to some of our customers, that didn't make any sense to us, and it also didn't make any sense to replicate the team and the systems and all those things.
Yeah, but it was a criteria.
Oh no, it was
that
absolutely.
It was to be separate. So based on the criteria, you couldn't do what you're proposing to do.
Exactly.
So it's really not relevant in terms of the sum here. That the 1 billion figure is assuming that the rules at the start would be changed.
Yeah, but I suppose the question we were asked by the committee was, what would it cost to roll this out? We're telling you under very clear criteria that we have, they are not the MVP criteria. Completely accept that.
Yeah,
and
it's a new model completely.
Yeah, it's a different way.
Cherry picking aspects of the previous model and saying we can do it for this, but it's not actually what we asked for.
Well, I suppose I think what you asked for was to bring fibre to the home to rural Ireland. This delivers that. It delivers it under a different model. If it's not the model that the MEP or the department, that's absolutely fine, but we were asked that question.
But it's not comparable in terms of like with like.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
apples and
I
oranges.
think the output is comparable, but the process maybe not, is not.
Okay, so, you just said that you're applying the same rules, or assume the same variables that you are to the 330 or the 340.
It's going to be 340 when we finish.
339 or
Pick them
340.
new ones up every day.
So you're layering on the sum from the 339 onto the 540. But wasn't, and I met you at the Public Accounts Committee previously. Was the point not that the 300,000, the point's been continuously made, that they're the low-hanging fruit? I just keep hearing that term, the easy access, and this has distorted the project, or this sort of conversation. So really to apply the same cost per house to transfer the 330 onto the 540 is a disingenuous sum.
So we're not applying the same cost.
Oh, I thought you said you were applying
We're applying the same rules.
Okay.
So it's not the same cost. So where the 300,000 that we picked the next most commercially viable, absolutely. We've never apologised for that, because we were asked by the department, where are you going to roll out commercially, and we told everybody. So that's absolutely the case. And did they take revenue out of the MEP business case? Yes, but they also should have taken cost out. And the revenue was taken out, but the cost wasn't. So we're not saying it's going to cost us the same to pass a home in the intervention footprint. What we're saying is we will do all the things the same that we did in the 300,000. So we'll charge the same connection charge. We'll charge the same connection criteria, overhead rather than underground. We'll use the poles and ducts.
The 170.
We'll have the SLA and all of that. So but it will be like our homes pass cost for the 300,000 is just under 800. That would be in excess of 1,000 in whatever. So it won't be the same cost, but all the same criteria will be applied.
So they'll be getting the same standard.
Same product, absolutely.
But again, it's not the standard. That
No, it isn't. They won't be getting.
It's a different standard.
They won't
So
be getting as good as SLA, exactly. They won't be getting that.
It's different. So
And
we're
they'll
back to the apples and oranges
no,
again.
absolutely. Yep.
When I had you in the Public Accounts Committee, the question I'm Chair, I've just been distracted here. When I was in the Public Accounts Committee, I asked you, I didn't ask you, the Chair, Mr. Fleming, or Deputy Fleming, asked about getting it to the door. And you said it's a 50-metre drop, and our plan is to bring the cable from the pole outside one's house to the eaves of the house.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, my understanding was from that meeting that you were running the cable down the road, and then another provider, either yourselves or another provider, we'd say Virgin, would charge the people in the house the amount of money from the road to their house.
No, we do the connection, and we charge the operator, whether they be Vodafone or Air Retail or Sky or IFA, a connection charge for that, and then they decide whether they want to pass it on as part of their proposition.
So you say 170 quid to
Virgin, they might charge
house,
a 50 or whatever.
and they might say, we'll waive you that.
And I suppose our point is that our connections, we say we will go overhead, we won't go under, we won't dig a duct.
So in terms of a business model, like the €170 versus the 100, I mean, the difficulty, and it's been well voiced at this committee, but also in other committees, like the huge difficulties of getting to the difficult places. So how does that work, the 170? So you're saying you're applying the sum of 170 to even the most difficult places to get through?
Again, it's back to our prices are regulated. It costs us a lot more than whatever. So that's an average cost. It's applied set by the regulator, and we charge that to everybody.
Okay.
As long as you're willing to have that overhead connection, just to be clear.
Okay, so then the overbuild, and we had this, I think, here last week as well, or the duplication, or whatever people want to call it. So there's a cable on it already, and I'm talking about the 300.
Yeah.
There's a cable on it already, and you're using that. And then there was a conversation here last week, which I'm sure you were too busy to look in on, about would the MBI plug in either end of your 300. So I'm assuming your 300 aren't all in a row. Is the first thing.
No, definitely not. Couldn't be that easy.
Yeah, but in terms of at the genesis of this, did CSIRO or MBI come to you and ask you to upgrade what's running along those 300?
So when we designed the 300,000, we were in MBP. We were in the process and hoping to win. So we designed our 300,000 rollout with extra fibres in there, and also more expensive connection points. so that we could, if we were successful, or if someone else was successful, use that fibre and use those connection points to continue on into the intervention area and down those footprints. Yeah. We offered a passive product to the bidder, the remaining bidder, to do that, so they wouldn't have to overbuild in the MBP, but they they made the decision to do the overbuild rather than to use that product.
And what were your speeds? What's the speeds on those?
So it's the same fibre that we run, it's just extra fibres that we have in there, so there was no speed issue. What I heard from someone earlier on was that they said, they weren't sure about the criteria and how long they'd have the product for 25 years or whatever, but exactly the same rules apply to that regulated product as apply to our poles and ducts regulated product, and they're happy to use them, so I don't understand why they wouldn't have been happy to use the passive product.
There was commentary last week. Who was in here last week again? Who were the witnesses?
Wait, University of Limerick academics.
Yes, it was to do with the standard of the cable, and there was a reference that what was already on maybe I don't attribute the wrong comments, maybe I heard it on one of the shows, but the cable that was running on the 300 poles was not next generation standard. Is that not true?
Not true, absolutely not true.
Is the cable that's sitting on the 300 poles the same quality, future-proof, next generation that the emerging preferred bidder are going to use? There's no difference in that.
Yeah, there's no difference on the spare fibres there and the spare connectors.
The capacity and the speed on your 300 is equal?
Absolutely.
Well, there's no quality issue here.
There's no issues, no.
So you're telling me, or us, that 1 billion are to design, so that's to roll it out over the 540, to build it, despite the complexities of the intervention area, to connect it to people's doors
based on our
over the
criteria,
ground, and they can duct it or do whatever they want themselves, and then to operate it and maintain it as per the proposal for 25 years. You're saying that will cost 1 billion. Now you're taking out the factor, obviously, as you own the poles, that could be another 900,000, so you could nearly add that on if you were to go to the level playing field.
Because we have the revenue over the 25 years, and that's what subsidises the cost of maintaining. But when we don't own it, when the network is not ours, someone else has it, and we lose the proper customers, we lose the revenue.
But the 1 billion figure is all coming from having a different terms of reference starting out, having a different service level agreement for your customers, and having theoretically re-entering the procurement process, which could take 3 or 5 years, and technically you could, or other companies could pull out in the meantime, and theoretically we could have no broadband in 5 years' time.
In theory, absolutely, but I suppose we're answering the question we were asked.
So it's 1 billion plus 900 if you're to consider.
Well, no, because it's our poles and ducts, so we wouldn't be charging because we'd have the revenue.
But it's in the big company, which wouldn't be allowed anyway, because you're not allowed the rules.
But I suppose that never made sense to me. So I don't know why that was the rule, but that never made sense to me. It didn't apply to the other companies.
Yeah, well, it didn't apply to the other companies.
No, because again, we're like. This is back to level playing fields, because we're the biggest wholesaler. We have a wholesale to try and negate that. This was required, but it never made sense, and it was always going to drive extra cost.
So, I mean, my understanding is from the other meetings is that the reason for the difference is that it's a huge amount of taxpayers' money, the 3 billion, and there was the 300,000 was based on the 42-page or 32-page document. But in terms of the 3 billion or whatever billion of taxpayers' money to roll out broadband, that the whole point was that we needed to have oversight and governance of state money. Where if you had a large company that was providing wholesale whatever in Ireland, telecommunications, they could have another arm of their company invested in something else completely different to communications. And that the state money could theoretically and quite logically be siphoned from one arm of the company to another. Would you, and I know you're a private company, but you're also a citizen of Ireland, do you not think it's very serious that any amount of taxpayers' money will be going into a large company over a massive period of time that could go into other parts of the company we wouldn't have oversight of?
But I would say that the lowest risk you would take there is giving that money to Air. We're completely regulated. We produce regulated accounts every year that are scrutinised from MBI don't, none of the other bidders do. So I would have thought you have maximum visibility of our costs on our accounts, much more so than you have for the other operators.
But there would be a risk in terms of the global company,
No,
the
certainly
big company.
certainly no larger than risks that you would put in with other bidders, I would say.
How much money has come out of Air over the last 20 years in dividends? And
So, I mean, investors, so I can't comment on the last 20 years, I'm the CEO for 14 months, but investors invest to make a return. They could put their money into other countries, but they've put their money into 250 million into improving broadband infrastructure in rural Ireland. I think that's something that we should be happy about.
I am happy about investment. I'm
But they're
more
still
concerned about taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
The argument that, the point being that to have this newly formed company as part of the terms of reference to start was to protect taxpayers and to have oversight. Would you not think that if that change hadn't been made, that it could theoretically have been possible for taxpayers' money to have been channelled in other ways through a company that wouldn't ultimately reach?
So I come back to the point that I think, in terms of the regulation and oversight on Air, we're the least risky of all those. But the other option, another model to do was on the basis of a USO. And again, you get regulatory oversight or whatever. That's not the model that was picked. So if that was the worry about taxpayers' money, there's other models there. I wouldn't consider us to be any more risky than any other person.
So in terms of what the USO, the potential USO, we'll say, and what's already on the table, what would you take out? What do you think is in the broadband plan that's just overkill or too much, or could be?
There's a couple of things. First of all, I'd remove the 40,000 in rural that we've already done, because that will save you 40 million. I would not focus on the urban infills, because I think commercially they will be delivered over time, and probably some of them have already been delivered, and as part of our national build we'll pick some of them up. I would focus on the rural homes that are left, because I think if you narrow that down, it's more achievable and the timeline. So I'd certainly do that. I see absolutely no need for a rural SLA that's better than the national SLA. It's very inefficient, and I don't know any person running a network that would recommend that. I would see absolutely no reason to have a smaller connection charge in the intervention footprint than you have in the 300,000 of the rest of the country. And I see no reason for the bidder not to use the passive product to get through the 300,000. I think if you made all those changes, you would save, a decent amount of money, in my opinion. And I don't think that the people receiving the service would be any worse really off than they are
Any
today.
worse really off? What's the technical difference for the person selling
but
whatever?
But like an SLA of 90% versus 85%, speed of repair, it makes very little difference, except it's completely inefficient. So you have people sitting around the country and rural engineers waiting for repairs to come in. It makes no sense. No one running a network would agree to that. It makes no sense. So, and it's not particularly beneficial to consumers either. So, I would strip all that back, because if I was living in rural Ireland, I'd want my fibre connection, and I'd be happy enough with my €170 connection charge like the rest of the country, and I'd be happy with an 85% SLA like the rest of the country, and that will save some money, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Deputy Murphy.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate you giving me just a few minutes because I'm not on the committee. First of all, Caroline, I must say, as somebody who comes from rural Ireland, I'm enthused by your presentation. We've had 3 or 4 public announcements going back over 7 years about broadband in this country. And I can tell you, particularly in rural Ireland, people are sick, tired, angry, annoyed and fed up with government. The past 2 governments in particular, I don't want to politicise this, because they have been left without any service in many areas. And you have fielded every question here today as far as I'm concerned. You have had difficult questions, and that's any member's right to ask a question. But I can say, going back to my constituency of Roscommon, Galway, and people who will be watching this, and people who will pick up on it in the main news feeds later on this evening, will be very enthused by what you're saying. And I get the feel that you want to get involved here, you want to bring this product into the rural Ireland, you want to deliver to the people. And I come from a county where, by the way, at one stage, in recent years, people with, in exporting business and importing business, and I think of Westport Scania in my own town of Strokestown, where, by the way, you're pretty active at the moment installing broadband. But they, at one stage, had to take their, material that needed to be sent very quickly to Scania in Sweden, to the town of Mullingar, so it could be sent without delay. It couldn't be sent. These are the type of problems we've had to deal with. And it's an absolute scandal that we've allowed year after year after year of this to continue. And I had another case where somebody had to switch their business out of part of Roscommon, North East Roscommon to Lombard. So let's deal with the facts here as what people have had to suffer over the years. And I can tell you what people are saying out there in rural Ireland and in the villages and towns in our rural counties that need it as well. We want broadband. And one interesting point that arose in the recent local election campaign where I was canvassing with candidates was, we don't need, in many cases, high-speed broadband. This is what they were saying on their doorstep. We want reliable broadband. Reliable broadband. Where, as one person said to me, when I'm doing my passport application, that it doesn't break down in the middle of it. Where in this case of a person who employs 5 people and they're doing the wages electronically, that it doesn't break down on a Thursday evening. That's what people want. And I feel from where you're coming today, you're giving some hope and some enthusiasm. And in fairness to Deputy Dooley, I know he has been, talking about Ayr and somebody like Ayr delivering this for some time. Now, what I want to just ask you this evening is, where you have come to the edge of towns and villages, and where, say, if you went a quarter of a mile left, quarter of a mile right, a quarter of a mile north-south, you have 300 houses plus. How can we, or can you do anything? And I talk a lot about East Galway and parts of Roscommon this. Can you do anything to connect up there, where there is quite a number of houses, but the broadband is coming to the edge of the village, to the edge of the town, and it's going no further? That is a disaster at the moment. So can you, as you stand at the moment, can you continue on that? Can you bring any hope to those people who want to be connected up? And by the way, it's horrific in parts of East Galway, and it's horrific in parts of Roscommon. So those people, some of them in business, many ordinary householders, are looking for that service. So can you give me any hope, or can you do anything for those as things stand at the moment?
So I'm afraid I can't give you any hope, and and I know that's not the answer you want. And I can absolutely tell you that people write to me and contact me about this every day, because we are literally closing out our rural builds now. As I said, by the end of the summer, we'll have that 340,000 done, and we're starting our national build. And we could just keep on going, and it would be all into the intervention footprint, which would cause some more problems, but we could just keep on going, and it wouldn't be 340, it'd be 400,000, and I'd be over budget, and I'd be behind on my kind of national bill. So I know that's not the answer you wanted, but I'd rather be honest with you than put out false hope. The only thing we are doing, that has just reminded me, we are doing some fixed wireless trials in some rural areas to see, what the opportunity there is. We've got the technology built in 4 areas, and we're going to put some customers onto it. So depending on that works, maybe there's an opportunity there. But for fibre, certainly for the moment, our focus is now going to turn to national once we get the 340,000 finished at the end of summer.
And very briefly, I know there are broadband officers attached to most local authorities. Yeah. I presume you have a working arrangement with those, and you're well aware of the difficulties and the areas that they are telling you where there are difficulties.
Yeah, no, they channel into us, and like part of the, as I said, this original number was just over 300,000. So part of those additional 40,000, some of them came in on the back of requests from broadband officers, and we've been at a number of events with them as well, so we get some feedback from them. And in some areas where they're particularly proactive, it's much easier for us to get our licences and some of the things we need to do. So when it works pretty well with the broadband officers.
So the bottom line is what you're saying here, you would be interested in a re-tendering process, and if you got that, you would be able to deliver to many parts of rural Ireland. If
it commercially made sense for us, absolutely, and we know how to do it because we've just finished in 340,000.
Thank you.
Judy, you want to come back in?
Just one very minor supplementary at the end. I was just looking at the record of what the Taoiseach said in the Dáil today, and he said, it seems that the 1 billion bid about which Ayr is talking would involve passing homes but not connecting any of them, and does not cover maintenance costs for 25 years. Therefore, it would be pretty useless to anyone. I'd just like to hear your response for absolute clarity.
So for absolute clarity, that's not true. So the 1 billion absolutely includes passing and connecting homes. And because we would be keeping those customers on our network and migrating them to the fibre network, the revenue that generates allows us to maintain that infrastructure going forward in the same way as the revenue we make on the copper network today does. So that's
and for final clarity, the quality of the service that would be available to the 542,000 would be absolutely the same as available currently to the 300,000.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Very, very, very finally, because I just feel we have, Deputy O'Connell.
So the 1 billion is for passing and the connection, and there's no difference in quality.
Yeah.
And
versus our 300,000, but as you established,
yeah.
things are different for what's in the tender process.
Yeah, so for the same service level as the 300,000, that's the 1 billion. And then there's a 900 million, but that is the upgrade and maintenance of the poles, which you already use, but it's still a cost because it's a cost to your business as such.
Yeah, but we have revenue to cover that cost.
Yes, but it's still a cost.
Yeah.
Where you get the money from, but it's still a cost. And then in terms, have you any figure, or that's the maintenance, and in terms of upgrading, so of keeping the network ahead, so have you any figure for that amount, or is that in the 1 billion?
I mean, if we basically replace our rural network with an all-fibre network, that's one massive upgrade. And after that, then it's just the annual replacement of poles, but that's all part of our maintenance capex that we have in today. I mean,
do you have a figure for that?
No, but we have to do that anyway. We own those 1.2 million poles today, so we will continue to maintain them, as long as somebody's using them, whether it's us or them.
Yeah, but to upgrade them for the next generation.
But over the 25 years of the project, the cost of maintaining and upgrading our poles and ducts is the 900 million that we talked about.
Maintaining and upgrading.
Yeah.
And how can you put a figure on that if we don't know?
Because our costs, our prices are regulated based on cost orientation. So 600 euros for a pole. We have an annual replacement cycle. The cost of doing our subduct and ducts.
900. What we say? The guts of a million or billion. Sorry, 900 is covering all maintenance, all upgrade, and that's based on your current staffing costs.
Yeah, and cost orientated pole and duct pricing.
Yeah, and. Then the only thing left is the VAT.
Yeah, and that's included. Yeah.
The VAT's included.
Yeah.
So the 1.9 billion, which is the 900 for the upgrading and the cost of upgrading. I understand your point.
No, you guys want to include that, but I like that.
But that's like me saying I'm going to just use this car I have already and not including it in my company costs. That's just not how you do things. I mean, if it costs. But if there's a 900 million cost of doing something, and whether you were doing it anyway, it's still a cost to the project.
But it wouldn't be a cost to the state.
Yeah, it would be our cost.
If you look at the moment, there's talking about a cost base of 5 billion euros, including the cost of rolling out, the maintenance over 25 years, and all the other costs associated with it. And from what we've heard, 3 billion of that cost is subsidy to the taxpayer. What we're saying is, instead of a 3 billion subsidy, it would be a 1 billion subsidy, would be the residual between we've got all our costs of maintenance, our costs rolling out, and we have revenue, and then we have the bit that's missing is €1 billion. So, yes, it's true to say that there are more costs over the life than €1 billion, but those costs will be recovered from the revenue that we'll get through the plan.
It's just a different business model entirely. I mean, I thought the point was that the national broadband plan would cost 1 billion. But what you're saying, the cost to your company would be 1 billion. Or sorry, the cost to the taxpayer would be 1 billion, which are two totally different questions.
Well, they actually end up being the same answer. So our cost to roll out.
Once you deliver the same thing at the end.
Yeah, so our cost to roll out, based on the information that we have, it would cost us less than $1 billion to roll out. As it happens, when you factor in maintenance and you factor in all the other elements, it would probably end up being about $1 billion is also the subsidy that would be required.
So 1 billion to roll it out, then 900 million for the upgrade that we mentioned.
But there'd be other costs. There'd be wholesale costs of running a wholesale organisation. There'd be all the other costs. So it would be less than 5 billion, obviously.
It would be less than 5 billion.
Yeah, because the residual subsidy is not 3 billion anymore. It would be 1 billion.
Yeah, but I suppose my point is that you're using stuff you have already. So you're using ingredients you have already, so therefore they're not comparable.
No, they're not, and we're not charging the taxpayer for them.
Yeah, and also the figures coming out today are not for what we asked for in the first place, nor is it giving the same SLA.
Agreed.
So it really is not only apples and oranges, we're kind of into potatoes and oranges at this stage. I mean, it's a totally different project. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Lombard, really quickly, because
I'll be very brief. Look, I appreciate now time's running on. We're on for 7:30. You mentioned USO. That interesting proposal. How do you think that would work regarding broadband?
So I suppose we need to sit down. The regulator would need to design it, but there is a model where someone could be designated a USO to provide broadband, and agreed costs and agreed models as part of that. And as you delivered it, you would get those costs back from the state. So now I don't know how long it would take to do that. And there was obviously lots of rules, and there would have to be absolute clarity about that the costs were spent and how you spent them. But you know, the USOs for broadband exist in other countries, so that is a different. What would
model. The minimum speed be? Would it be the same comparable speed?
Yeah, I mean, I think you with the regulator who's designing it, they would define what the product has to be to provide the USO. So that would all have to be agreed and defined.
And going on, like there's a USO already there for voice, and that's you'd be basically following that same template.
Well, I think that, the USO with voice is is very it covers phone books and phone boxes or whatever. So I think you'd have to start again and say what product do you want, and you want a fibre to the home future-proof product probably. So that's what the USO would be based on, and you'd agree that with the regulator, and you'd agree the cost, and you'd agree how you got your money back if you deliver that.
And are you happy with the original voice proposal there? Are you happy with that?
No, we're challenging the regulator on that because we're very happy with the idea that we, as a state, we want to provide that service all over the country and with no extra cost. We just don't believe we should pay the entire bill for it. It costs us 10 million a year to provide that service, and as some of these people aren't our customers.
So you're challenging with the regulator at the moment?
Yeah, we're challenging that, the USO, yeah.
And explain to me the reasons why. Again, sorry, no, I wasn't.
No, it's fine. We're challenging based on fairness. So we're regulated to provide a telephone service to people no matter where they are in the country. We're also regulated to provide phone books, and we're also regulated to run phone boxes. That's, as a state, we believe that that's right. That's absolutely fine. But Air pays the entire bill for that, and it's 10 million a year, even though the service that's provided in many cases is not to Air's customers. So what we would say is we're happy to pay the percentage of the bill for Air's customers, but the other operators who benefit from that USO should pay for their customers. So we've challenged the regulator on the basis of fairness, and that 10 million a year is a lot of money, and if it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do. No issue with that. We'll pay our fair share, but other operators should pay their fair share. So that's the debate.
If you had the same thing for broadband, you'd be expecting the same, and you'd be looking for the same anomaly. So if you put in, if there was a USO for actual broadband, you'd only pay your share in it. Is that what you're proposing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't sat down and discussed a USO model with the regulator, but you'd have to work all that stuff out. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is
because the USO was designed when we were the only provider, and it made sense then. But over time, other people have taken share, and we provide the service for everybody, and we pay the bill for everybody. So we're saying to the regulator, we don't think that's reasonable.
Don't get me wrong, and I missed some of your presentation. I would have heard that you were in favour of the USO, and now you're challenging it when it comes to voice.
But they're completely different things. I think to say that, is disingenuous.
And maybe I am, and I apologise.
Let her finish.
Yeah. The voice USO is a historic service that's has been in the market for years. It was set up probably in the telecom era, and when we had the monopoly. I think it's ridiculous we're providing phone books in this day and age, if being quite honest, and spending money on them, and then phone boxes or whatever. But it exists, and it costs us 10 million a year to provide that. So if we want to keep that as a country and say, yeah, we want it, it's the only utility where it applies. Electricity, if you want to have electricity to a remote location, you pay the bill, etc., etc. We're saying to the regulator, that's fine. If we want, that's fine. We'll pay the 50% for our market share, but other operators whose customers benefit from this service should pay their share. I think that's completely reasonable.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I have to leave it there, sorry. I have to leave it there. I want to thank you for coming before us this afternoon. So the Joint Committee stands adjourned until 5 p.m. on the 26th of June. Thank you.